Greetings. This is Minister Adam Butts with JCC Sunday School lesson for April 19th, 2020. Today's lesson comes out of Boyd's commentary and Townsend International commentary titled Injustice Will Be Punished. Sunday School is now in session. Our unifying topic for today is Justice Prevails. The scripture comes from Esther chapter 7, verses 1 through 10. And our key verse for today is Esther 7, verse 10, which reads, "So they impaled Haman on the pole he had set up for Mordecai. Then the king's fury was subsided." Let's go on to our text today, starting with Esther chapter 7, verse 10. "So the king and Haman went to Queen Esther's banquets, and they were drinking wine on the second day. And the king asked again, 'Queen Esther, what is your petition? It will be given to you. What is your request? Even up to half the kingdom, it will be granted.' Then Queen Esther answered, 'If I have found favor with you, your majesty, if it pleases you, grant me my life. This is my petition, and spare my people. This is my request. For I and my people have been sold to be destroyed, killed, and humiliated. If we were merely going to be sold as male and female slaves, I would have kept quiet, because no such distress would justify disturbing the king.' King Xerxes asked Esther, 'Who is he? Where is he, the man who dared to do such a thing?' Esther said, 'An adversary and an enemy, the vile Haman.' And Haman was terrified before the king and the queen. The king got up in rage, left his wine, and went out into the palace garden. But Haman, realizing that the king had already decided his fate, decided to stay behind and beg Queen Esther for his life. Just as the king returned from the palace garden to the banquet hall, Haman had fell over on the couch where Esther was reclining. The king exclaimed, 'Even he molests the queen while she is with me in the house.' As soon as the words left the king's mouth, they covered Haman's face. Then Barhana, one of the eunuchs, attended to the king, saying, 'A pole reaching a height of 50 cubits stands by Haman's house. He had set it up for Mordecai, who had spoke up for the king.' The king said, 'Impale him on it.' So they impaled Haman on the pole he had set up for Mordecai. Then the king's fury had subsided." Brothers and sisters, as we go through our lesson tonight, we're going to start off with a little background like we do each week. First of all, the story of Esther takes place about 100 years after the Babylonian exile. At that time, many Jews were living in a city called Susa, the capital of Persia Empire. The main characters of Esther are as follows: Esther, who was the Jewish queen; Mordecai, who some say is an uncle, some say is her cousin. But anyhow, he definitely mentored Esther throughout her life as her parents had died. King Xerxes is the king of Persia. Haman is the highest ranking officer for the king. The book of Esther is a very interesting story in the Bible, and there's actually no mention of God in the book. Yet his presence is felt all throughout the journey of Esther and Mordecai. So while I read chapter 7 already into your ears, that's the climactic point of Esther. To fully understand how they got to that point, we got to go back and see exactly what was going on. So the book of Esther actually began with the king throwing a banquet to show everyone how rich and powerful he was. At this banquet, though, the queen at that time refused to join the king in all his shenanigans during that time. But her actions led the king to remove her as queen at the behest of his advisor. Sometime later, the king held a beauty contest in search of another queen. Esther was found to be the fairest of them all, so she became queen. What was unknown at the time was Esther was a Jew, and she was mentored by Mordecai to keep her heritage secret in the contest and even as she became the queen. See, Mordecai, once Esther became the queen, Mordecai was always a stone's throw away from Esther in the courts of the palace. He was right outside the gate. Now, one day, Mordecai overheard two soldiers plotting to kill the king. He told Esther about the plot, and she subsequently told the king about the plot. And she made sure she gave Mordecai all the credit for saving the king at that time. Now, Haman enters the story when the king promotes him to the highest position in the kingdom. Now, a little bit about Haman is the fact that he's an Agagite or Canaanite, and they dislike the Jews. Haman desires honor, and he requests that all before him kneel down as he passed by. So one day, as he was leaving the palace, everyone knelt down as they supposed to, but Mordecai refused. Haman then discovered that Mordecai was a Jew, so he plotted to kill not only Mordecai, but all the Jews. Haman convinced the king that it was in his best interest to kill all the Jews. So the king actually signed a decree. And what Haman did is he rolled the dice to determine what day the genocide of the Jews will actually begin. It so happened that it was going to be 11 months after that date. Now, hearing about this decree, Mordecai sought assistance from Queen Esther. He wanted her to go to the king on behalf of his people, or of her people. She initially said that she, like everybody else, is not allowed to go to the king unless summoned by the king. For she knew that the king would go as far as kill an individual if they were to come to him without his requested appearance. Mordecai replied to her, and this is his reply actually put all of us on the front line when God calls us to do something. In Esther chapter 4, verses 13 and through 14, Mordecai says, "Do not think that because you are in the king's house, you alone of all the Jews will escape. For if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance for the Jews will rise from another place, but you and your father's family will perish. And who knows, but you may have come to your royal position for a time such as this." Esther heard Mordecai loud and clear. She agreed to help. But what she did in order to help, she said she sent word to all the Jews in Susa. She said she wanted them to fast day and night as she prepared to approach the king without his request. She said, "If I perish, I perish." So on the third day of this fast, Esther entered the courts of the king's court. And when the king saw her, he immediately lowered his scepter in a gesture allowing her to approach him. She then requested the presence of both the king and Haman at a banquet that she prepared for them later that day. Later, at this banquet, Queen Esther said she had a special request from the king that she would like to ask, not right then, but she would like to ask him the following day when she prepared another banquet, again for both him and Haman. She requested the king attend this as well, and the king agreed. Now, it's two things that's very, very important that happened after, at the conclusion of this first banquet here. These two things are where God began to work in this situation. Right now, the Jews are scheduled to be terminated 11 months from then. Right now, Mordecai is set to die as well, even up to Queen Esther, because they were all Jews. But that evening, after the first banquet, is two key things that happened that show God began to turn the situation around. First, as Haman was leaving, he ran into Mordecai, and out of pure prejudice and spite, he actually told his servants when he got back to his home, prepare a sharpened pole 75 foot tall so he can impale Mordecai on it the next morning. That same evening, the king, he couldn't sleep. So he had someone read him the royal chronicles like a bedtime story, so to speak. One of the stories in this chronicle was about Mordecai and how he saved the king from the assassination attempt. So here we are. The next morning comes and Haman rushes over to get permission to kill Mordecai from the king. But before Mordecai could ask the king what he wanted, the king told him that he wanted Mordecai honored publicly before saving his life. As a matter of fact, he wanted Haman to personally put the robes on Mordecai and put him on the royal horse before leading him through the kingdom to be celebrated and praised for his loyalty. Now, one thing to note here, all the honors that was bestowed upon Mordecai at this time came at the suggestion of Haman. The problem was Haman thought when the king was saying he wanted to honor someone and what should he do for him, Haman thought it was for him. He wouldn't have thought in his wildest dreams that he was about to honor Mordecai, the Jew. This is where our story shifts. This is where we get into the second banquet, which takes place in chapter 7, which I've already read to you. This is when Haman and the king arrive. Let's begin our reading from the NIV version, starting with verse 1 of chapter 7. So the king and Haman went to the queen's banquet. So here, after setting up the plot for Mordecai to be impaled, Haman came along with the king to Esther's second banquet. Haman, first of all, was honored to attend anything with the king, as it increased his ego every single time. It is amazing how some people can treat other people poorly, and then it just doesn't seem to fade them at all. Haman at that point had already moved to have a decree for the king to kill all the Jews and take their money. The king here was no better because he's the one that signed the decree. So the enemies of the Jews had come to dine unknowingly with the queen of the Jews. Esther shows us that we don't have to disconfigure our face and curse out everyone that plots against us, that plots to destroy us. When God gives us our purpose, we have to sometimes dine with our enemies to achieve the purpose that God has for us. Sometimes we have to let our enemies think they're winning, but knowing full well that God gets the final say. As we move to verse 2, it says, and as they were drinking wine on the second day, the king again asked Queen Esther, what is your petition? I will give you anything. What is your request? Even up to half the kingdom, it will be granted. In James chapter 4, verse 2, it says, you desire but have not, so you kill. You covet but cannot get, so you quarrel and fight. You do not have because you do not ask of God. See, in order to help the Jews from exile who are now in Persia, Esther has to ask the king several questions, including his attendance to 2 banquets. And the third one she was about to ask. Esther was at the table at this point because she swallowed her fear and built up her faith. She also fasted for 3 days, and then she went to the king without an invitation. Now at this banquet, the king stands waiting for Esther to ask her special requests. He even comforts her by saying that nothing short of half the kingdom is off limits for her, being that she's his bride. So Esther asked a question that will set her people free. In verses 3 and 4, it says, then Esther answered, if I have found favor with you, your majesty, if it pleases you, grant me my life. This is my petition. Spare my people. This is my request. For I and my people have been sold to be destroyed, killed, and humiliated. If we had merely been sold as male and female slaves, I would have kept quiet, because no such distress would qualify disturbing you as the king. See, here, Esther revealed her heritage in front of those who opposed the Jews. And she made her petition and her request known to the person that can do something about it. Brothers and sisters, I ask, what does God ask of you? And moreover, are you willing to even ask of your enemies, if needed, to fulfill the purpose and the plan that God has for your life? When Mordecai told Esther the very reason that she may be queen right now was for a time such as this, he was saying that the favor that God bestowed upon her may be because God knew that his people would need an inside woman. By God knowing the injustices that his people would face at that time, it required the birth of a beautiful yet brave woman 20 years prior before it was ever needed. A woman who knew the plight of her people, yet was able to understand the desires and the culture of others. Yes, we're talking about Esther. God had prepared Esther for her purpose, but she had to decide if she was going to ask the question to complete her task, to complete her mission, to complete her purpose. We have to do the same with our purpose by first understanding it. And then we have to believe that God has equipped us with what we need. Then we need to start working. We need to start asking, and we need to start walking. This is what Esther is showing us here. As we move to verse 5 and 6, King Xerxes asked Esther, who is he? Where is he? The man who dared to do such a thing. Esther said, an adversary and an enemy, this vile Haman. Then Haman was terrified before the king and queen. See, Haman had plotted against Mordecai and all the Jews by this time. The date was set for their genocide based on a roll of a pear or dice. This date was set for 11 months after the decree was signed, based on the rolling of the dice. See, what he didn't know is this gave Mordecai and Esther time to formulate a plan to save their people. This team of cousins did not run from the fight, nor did they throw a single punch. The plot that Haman had set in motion is the same plan that caused his own demise. As we move to verse 7 and 8, it says, the king got up in rage. He left his wine and went into the palace garden. But Haman, realizing that the king had already decided his fate, stayed behind to beg the queen for his life. Just as the king returned from the palace garden to the banquet hall, Haman was falling on the couch where the queen, Esther, was reclining. The king exclaimed, well, he even molests the queen while she is with me in my house. As soon as the words left the king's mouth, they covered Haman's face. So, like the Greeks and the Romans, the Persians, they reclined for their meals on a sofa or couch as they ate. So Haman, in his passionate plead, he threw himself onto the couch or at the foot of Esther. And that's where the king saw him, and that got the king even more enraged. So when it says they covered Haman's face or covered his head, that signaled that he was going to die. See, the Macedonians and the Romans were known to muffle the face of their prisoners before executing them. This might have also been a custom in Persia at that time. As we move down to verse 9 and 10, it says, then Haman, one of the eunuchs, extended to the king and said, a pole reaching the height of 50 cubits stands by Haman's house. He set it up for Mordecai, who spoke up to help the king. The king then said, impale him on it. So they impaled Haman on the pole he set up for Mordecai. Then the king's fury subsided. Esther served as an example that injustice does not go unpunished. Mordecai and Esther won this battle with Haman simply by believing that in their purpose and speaking up when injustice showed up, they could win. This is what they showed in this battle. They could win simply by doing that. We can compare the plight of those two to one of Joseph in Genesis. He was sold into slavery by his brothers before the Lord actually exalted him to second in command in Egypt. And when it was all said and done, he actually said in Genesis 50:20, he said, "You intended to harm me, but God intended it for the good to accomplish what he now is doing and saving the lives of many." Haman meant to destroy all the Jews in Persia by decree. But it was a second decree that went out, allowing the Jews to protect themselves and to defend themselves, which saved many lives. Haman built a sharpened pole 75 feet high for Mordecai's body to hang from. Yet it was Haman's body that was impaled on that very same pole. What the enemy meant for evil, God had worked it out for their good. In fact, God has a track record of making enemies' plans backfire on them. Death plans backfired at the cross when Jesus died and got up on the third day. Not only did he get up, he made it possible for us to get up as well. What was meant to kill Christ made us live for eternity. What else does God show us through Esther in this story here? God shows us that he has a plan even when it seemed that all is lost. Even when it seemed like our enemy has won, God gives us comfort in knowing that the fact that he is the one who gets the last say. But brothers and sisters, serving God sometimes demands us risking our own security. See, our cardinal will and God's holy plan, they don't align. Our desires and wants typically leads to destruction, while God's plans lead to joy. To do God's plan, it requires us to sometimes walk in darkness because we don't know how he's going to get us through it, how he's going to get us through this obstacle. But by faith, we have to do what Esther did and step out and step up on faith. Our mindset that we need to have when we're going through is like this. Yes, we may lose some friends, yet I will follow you, God. Yes, the month is longer than my money, yet I will follow you, God. Yes, the mission seemed impossible, yet with God, all things are possible. So I will follow you, God. In Esther 4:16, after Mordecai had mentored her to actually help his people, this is what Esther said before she went into the battle and go and talk to the king. She said, "Go gather all the Jews who are in Susa and have them fast for me. Don't drink any water or eat anything for 3 days or 3 nights. I and my attendants will fast as well. When this is done, I will go to the king, even though the law does not allow it. And if I perish, I perish." Esther was sold out for her purpose. If it was God's will for her to die by doing what she's called to do, then so be it. Jesus said in John 12:25, anyone who loves their lives will lose it, while anyone who hates their life in this world will keep it for all eternity. God has a purpose for the situation that he places us in, brothers and sisters. So while we're walking out our purpose and serving God, we too will have plots against us. They will take our jobs. They will try to take our spouse. They try to take our joy and our peace. But God give us the truth in the middle of our attack. This truth of assured victory. The truth is in his word. For example, Galatians 6:7 says, "Do not be deceived. God is not mocked. For whatever one sows, that will he also reap." Isaiah 54:17, no weapon formed against you will prevail. You will refute every tongue that accuse you. This is the heritage of the servants of the Lord, and this is their vindication from me, declares the Lord. Psalms 21:11, though they plan evil against you, though they devise mischief, they will not succeed. Psalms 23:4-5. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me, thy rod and staff comfort me. Thou prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemy. Thou anoint my head with oil, my cup runneth over. Just like Esther, we need not be afraid of those who come up against us. We have to do what we can do and learn to let God do what we cannot. Evil will not prevail. God gets the final say. Amen. Brothers and sisters, this concludes our lesson for this week, April 19th, 2020. May God add a blessing to his word and a blessing to your day.